Hi, my name is Mark McPherson. I'm a water rights and environmental lawyer in Dallas, Texas. This is the third in a series of videos updating you on the progress of the Texas Water Development Board's rulemaking process to adopt new rules that apply to groundwater planning and management for the entire state of Texas. The rules project is so significant, the changes are so big, that the Development Board is proposing to just repeal all of their current rules and adopt these new rules from the get-go. The process at the agency began in earnest this January 2012 with stakeholder meetings, and that was followed by the Development Board drafting a set of pre-publication unofficial rules for us to comment on. That comment period just ended. And that's what the point is of this update, is to tell you what's happened, kind of where we're at. Subsequent to this now, for the week of September 17th of 2012, the Water Development Board will have a board meeting at which they're expected to approve these rules. When they do that, the rules will be published in the Texas Register. When that happens, we're going to have 30 days to comment on these rules, and that's it, 30 days. After that comment period will close. The Texas Water Development Board will take into account those comments. They'll make their rules final. They'll propose those final rules for adoption to the Water Development Board members. Of course, we're expected to vote to adopt them. And then we will have our new rules, whatever those may be. So time is really getting short now. We're down to the last 30-day comment period that is ever going to be for this rules project. For the comment period that just ended on these unofficial rules, there were 13 different comments that were filed. Of those 13 comments, 11 were filed by groundwater conservation districts. One of them was filed by Tthe, which is an environmental consulting firm hired by groundwater conservation districts to help them manage groundwater in the way that districts want to manage it. And so 12 of 13 comments are all on the same side of the fence. They're on the side of those who regulate the groundwater production and management. Then there was my comments. I'm the lone wolf on this one. I'm the only one that filed comments on behalf of people who use water, who seek to acquire groundwater and use it, particularly to make money. Groundwater can be a capital good. So let me just tell you what my biggest concern is, because my comment on this that I filed hasn't yet made it into the rules. Hopefully we can still get it in there before these rules become final. But the one big issue for me, and this comes from my experience in dealing with some conservation plans on behalf of energy company clients. The statute that was passed that generated this rules project requires groundwater conservation districts to balance between the highest practicable groundwater production, highest practical level of groundwater production. So that's not, that on the scale, that's not low, medium, that's the highest. To balance that with conservation, preservation, protection, recharging, and prevention of waste of groundwater, and to control subsidence. So it's the highest practicable use compared to all these conservation-minded issues. But the board's rules project instead goes off on a tangent, in my opinion, but it focuses on most efficient use of groundwater, and it has that as a defined term. That term is nowhere in any of these statutes, and it bothers me. First of all, the term efficient. In order to determine whether something is efficient or not, you really have to pick two different points in time, and you have to compare one to the other. Now, in order to provide equal protection across the entire state of Texas, we would need a rule that chose both of those points in time and mandated that each groundwater conservation district pick the same two dates. There's about 100 of these groundwater conservation districts. And so you can end up with some wildly different results from one district to the other if the Development Board doesn't choose which of those dates it is. The other problem with that is, in terms of selection of dates, is a groundwater district free to choose the lowest part of your cycle if you're seasonal, or the highest? If your business is dependent on markets, can they choose to select one of those dates for your lowest point and then require further conservation and control subsequent to that? I mean, when you're already at the bottom, or do they have to take into account, go back up to the top, or is it somewhere in between? Don't know. It's just most efficient use of groundwater. You know, if Texas Instruments had a production facility and they engineered a production process that let them use 20% less groundwater to produce a microchip, would the most efficient use of groundwater be to encourage them to produce their chips at that efficiency? Or would it be to, and basically by that point I mean increase production by 20% and still use the exact same amount of groundwater? So we're still using the same amount of groundwater, we're just producing more chips. Or does most efficient use of groundwater mean that if you reduce your production requirements, that you must also reduce production? Because the ultimate effect we're looking for here is to leave groundwater in the ground. Back just increasing production doesn't get that done, regardless of how more efficient a manufacturing process is. And how do you go about comparing efficient uses of groundwater between Texas Instruments and a computer chip, and say this nice can of my favorite beer, which is Shiner Bock, right here in Texas, or to a can of Dr. Pepper for that matter? And how do you compare those in terms of efficiencies? I just think we're asking for trouble, and we're pointing our districts in a way that's could get them in a lot of trouble as well. Now here's the definition, the proposed definition of that term by the Water Development Board. The most efficient use of groundwater means practices, techniques, and technologies that a district determines will provide the least consumption of groundwater for each type of use, that's groundwater use, balanced with the benefits of using groundwater. All right, let's just take that one step at a time. Practices, techniques, and technologies that a district determines. Not that the water user determines, but that a district determines. Well, how in the world is a district going to have the depth or breadth of experience to be able to figure out the difference between a computer chip maker, a beer maker, a brewery? Miller Brewing has got a big operation out in Fort Worth, in addition to my favorite Shiner down there in Shiner, Texas, to using groundwater to irrigate a lawn or using it for agricultural purposes. So how does a district determine that? I don't know. I don't think it can. And in fact, in other of our water conservation rules and regs at the state, we provide like a best management practices guide, a BMP guide, but we let the water user select which ones are more appropriate to that particular water user. We require them to have it. We just let the water user select the ones most appropriate to that particular user. Okay, well, let's go on. Practices, techniques, and technology the district determines will provide the least consumption of groundwater. Well, now we're back to the previous example of a computer chip, that you design a chip that uses 20% less groundwater. That's a less consumption of groundwater, but it seems to me that this is now leaning toward reducing production of water as opposed to allowing the manufacturer to increase production and use the same amount of groundwater. Then you've got the phrase for each type of use, and the problem with that is that we've not defined types of uses. We do in other state water planning, but we basically have agricultural, you have residential, you have single family and multifamily, you have commercial, and you have industrial. And those are very different. Agricultural and industrial water is more of a capital good. It's used to produce something else that makes a lot of money. Texas Instruments, the water chip, Dr. Pepper, breweries, they're examples of companies that use water line that way, as compared to residential and commercial, which is very, very similar. It's basically bathrooms and kitchens. Least consumption of groundwater for that type of use. And then you've got the balanced with the benefits of using groundwater. Now what's the balance? How do you compare the balance? How do you compare the benefits so that you can balance them of beer to a chip, a computer chip, or to the energy that runs the power that powers the light in this room or my computer that this is being recorded on? There's just too much breadth, too many options. And so I think, and I have proposed, that we eliminate entirely this defined term of most efficient use of groundwater. I don't think it's in the statute, and I think that the way it's being proposed to be defined is a recipe for disaster, certainly for those that use groundwater in any way. And I think it sets up the groundwater districts in an impossible situation of trying to make decisions that they're not capable of making, and of making them in such a disparate way from comparing one district to the other that equal protection would be violated across the state. And I would hope that in some way in these rules that we take more effort to protect groundwater districts from themselves and from each other, just as much as we protect groundwater districts from those who are seeking to use groundwater. So that what I think is one of just the big glaring issues of this rules project. There's plenty more. Stay tuned and get involved in this rules project. If you use groundwater, you need to be involved. This is a big deal. This opportunity is not going to come around very often, and we could use all the help we get at the table. Right now, there's many more of them at the table than there are of water users. So again, week of September 17th, the Water Development Board will approve these. Go to the Texas Register, and you have 30 days, that's it, to file written comments. And then after that, by December probably of this year, the Development Board will have issued their final rules, and we'll have what we have. Get involved now. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.